All right, so today we are talking to Dr. Olivier Civelli. We are talking about his paper recently published in 2021 entitled The Extract of Corydalis yanhusuo Prevents Morphine Tolerance and Dependence. Dr. Civelli is a professor and chair of pharmacology at the University of California Irvine. So thank you for talking with us today. I just want to start off with you as a researcher and getting to know your lab a little bit. What are the main questions that your lab at UC Irvine focuses on, and what's the main drive of your research there?
Well, my main research has been over the last 20 plus years to try to find new neurotransmitters in the brain. Essentially, I am a molecular biologist. So in my previous research, I was discovering new receptors for transmitter by using molecular biological tools. And I realized that there is more receptors than there are transmitters. So I decided that maybe I can use those receptors which don't have transmitter to try to find their natural transmitter. And we did that starting in the 1990s to 2005, 2006. We were using those receptors which don't have any natural transmitters to try to find the transmitter. And we were, to a certain extent, successful. We were the first one to use that approach and the first one to really find a new one. Then a lot of people started to join the search, because if you have a receptor and a transmitter and it's important in the brain, you can easily, you can from there develop a drug discovery program specific to that particular receptor, which is what people want to do in mental health research. What happened is that in the middle of the 2006, 2007, we started to fall on the problems that we could not find new transmitters. At that time, I realized that we still have several, about 80 receptors which don't have any transmitters. So I decided to start to look for, instead of finding the transmitter which is present in the brain of animals, try to use therapeutic plants as maybe a source of not exact transmitter, but a transmitter which could help us define the systems. That means a plant ligand, which could be used to try to understand the system. And that's how I became interested in a medicinal plant. And from there, we focused at the beginning on pain, because pain, after all, is a mental disorder. It's a psychiatric disorder to a certain extent. And we used several traditional medicine, several plant medicine, to try to find if we could find some new compound, new molecules in those plants which could be helpful with pain. And that's how I became interested in the field where I am now.
Yeah, so you kind of transferred from pain and then came on to this model where you used the morphine dependence. Can you talk about the development of that model a little bit?
Yes, well, what happens is that we screen 10 about plants for finding something which will work on the receptor of morphine. Mm-hmm. And in 2014, we were able to find a new alkaloid, a new compound, a new molecules in one particular plant called Corydalis yanhusuo, which was active as an analgesic. That means it could relieve pain. And it was interesting because it relieved, there are different kinds of pain, but in particular, it was relieving, it was good, or it was able to do something for chronic pain. So we published that. And what I didn't know is that this would make the news. And so what happens is, because it made the news, international news even, people were asking me for the compound that we had found. And of course, I cannot give them the compound. That was impossible. Because it will take a while to develop the compound, the pharmaceutical research. And so but I told them, if you want, you can always use the plant extract, because the plant extract is readily available. You can find it, in special store, or you can find it online. And several people told me, who wrote me and said, yes, the plant extract works very well for me. People who have, chronic pain. Chronic pain is this pain which is not very well defined. I mean, we call it neuropathic pain in our field, but it's, backache, you feel bad, and you cannot live very well because you are in pain. And several people told me this is good. Okay, fine. I did not, at first I did not, I said, so that's okay. But then I realized, I said, my God, we should, if I'm telling to people to maybe try the plant extract, not the compound, but the plant extract as a whole, I should test them in my assays. And the assays that we use are animal assays in mice, traditional, well-defined assay for pain. And when we tested the plant extract, we found out that yes, it works too. And not only we find out that it works too, but also that it acts in the brain via probably several systems, but in particular, it acts via blocking the dopamine system. And that's an important system because dopamine is a system which regulates many functions, but in particular, most importantly, reward. That means if you take an addictive drug, it will probably work on the dopamine system and increase the addictive property of that drug. So I saw that, we published that, and we say, okay, fine, it works in part as blocking the dopamine system. I did not, although here again, I did not, make too much a story of that, but when the opioid epidemic became absolutely clear, I realized that we had plant extract which can decrease pain, it's analgesic per se, and also could affect the dopamine system, which means addiction. So we decided that we will do a study where we test the plant extract in animals to see first if it decreases the amount of morphine we were giving to the animal. As an example, we always give morphine because it's a gold standard of pain medicine. Can we decrease the amount of morphine by combining it with this plant extract? And we found, yes, I mean, in a sense, you can use less morphine if you add the plant extract. It's not as powerful as morphine in some aspect as acute pain, but if you were to do that systematically, you would start, let's say, a regimen where you give morphine and the plant extract to a certain extent, you can decrease the amount of morphine, which is good. It will decrease the risk of addiction. But then when we went further, we saw that when we inject the plant extract with morphine, we decrease all the bad part of the morphine effect, which is tolerance, dependence, and addiction. The most important maybe is tolerance, because tolerance is something which is well known when we give morphine. Morphine loses its activity over time, which means that if you want to maintain an analgesic response, a pain-killing response, you have to increase the amount of morphine. And by increasing the amount of morphine over time, of course, you increase addiction, okay? And so what we find out is that in animals, when we give the extract, the Corydalis extract that we call YHS, Corydalis extract and morphine, we decrease the amount of morphine we need, and we block the tolerance. Which means that would be important because maybe, I mean, we decrease the tolerance. I shouldn't say block totally, but I mean, we clearly decrease the tolerance, which means that, it's something which can be maybe used and would be useful because you will need less morphine and you will not have the risk of having to increase morphine amount over time. And then when we went into animals even further, we find out that in our animal assays, this plant extract is able to decrease addiction as we measure it in animals. And I don't want to go into the details of the technique behind, but it's some assays which are defined for measuring addiction.
Right. So do you think that one of the benefits that YHS has is that it can be used in combination with like tested and tried and true analgesics? So do you think that will allow it to be more widely accepted in the treatment community?
You have to understand that this is something which is done in animals and only in animals. We cannot go into human with our study. Whether this plant extract could be used in trials, which are regulated trials, is another story, because it's although the plant extract is accepted by the FDA as a supplement, it's not something which can be easily tested in clinical trials, because first of all, different plant extracts are somewhat different, and secondly, we don't know all what is there behind.
Right.
But the question is that people can take it. They can order it, they can find it, and they can take it on their own if they want.
Yeah.
So this is maybe the, how should I say, the advantage of that. And maybe it can have an effect on addiction. It can, if it has an effect on addiction, it could have an effect on the opioid epidemic, ultimately.
Yeah. So you kind of mentioned how the FDA doesn't really have a category for natural products, especially natural products that don't have well-defined compound mixtures.
Oh,
Do you
yes.
see the acceptance of things like known remedies that were called folklore before, but now have seen to actually have medicinal responses? Do you see medicine turning towards those as we have run out of classical like drugs?
Not that fast. No, I don't see it like that, because in drug discovery research, I mean in pharmaceutical research, why would you do a study on a plant extract? I mean, if you are a big pharmaceutical company, there is the return is minimal. You cannot, you don't have access to all the plant extract of that particular plant. So I think if something happens, is because individuals are going to choose to try it, and maybe will say, okay, for me, it does something positive.
Yeah, so in the end, it has to be spread through like word of mouth and that kind of situation.
Yes, I mean through trials and error.
Yeah, that's fair. So for your research on YHS, it seemed to have a profound effect on morphine, which is what you tested. But do you think that it could, because it is working on something so broad as the dopamine system, you think it could be broadly applied to different types of addiction?
In principle, yes, maybe. We have dopamine antagonists. I mean, that, for example, all the drugs which are used, I mean, many of the drugs are used in psychotic research. I mean, antipsychotic are often NARM, which is dopamine antagonist, so they are not used to fight, in general, to fight any kind of addiction. Yes, they probably would block very well cocaine addiction, which works directly on the dopamine system. But I think our plant extract has this advantage of being analgesic. So it works onto something which call for drugs which tend to become addictive. So I don't see. Well, of course, you could take it for cocaine addiction, but I don't know. I don't know if that would be very successful. I've not tested it.
Yeah, hard to say. So from a more broad approach, do you think that patient advocacy in something like biomedical research could get something like this, where it's known in the patient world that it worked, to come more to the mainstream if there was more patient advocacy in biomedical research?
It's a plant extract. And if you buy it, you have different sources. We don't know how much of those sources can have side effect, can have negative effect. In general, they should not be too bad because they would probably not last very long, but there is that risk of not knowing all the toxicity potential of those plant extracts. So, but in the meantime, I would say that if you are really in a dear situation where you find that you are taking morphine or an opiate because you are getting addicted, you could start to think about mixing it with this plant and see if you can decrease maybe the opiate addiction.
Okay. One thing that we were also wondering is, what role do you see YHS playing in something like harm reduction to substance use? Do you think that it could play front and center? Do you think it's more of a step to making more complex, you mentioned in the paper, polymodal drugs?
Yes, well, that's how I look at it. I say it's because a plant extract being made of thousands of molecules, there is probably some which works here on that system, some which work on different systems, and together they can have an effect which is maybe more powerful than if we have a drug which works only on one system. So that's what our research is going after, and is trying to understand how does that work, this question about decreasing morphine tolerance, but this is molecular research, this is basic research. For people who would like to try, I would say yes, you can try it, maybe. I cannot prescribe that. I'm not a medical doctor. I just say we find in animals it's fine, but it's only in animals. And don't overuse it, because I don't know if side effect at high dose or something like that.
Right. That's fair. So one last question that we generally ask everyone is, if you could change one thing in the drug discovery space, especially for addiction treatment, what would it be?
I have to say I'm not sure, because addiction is a response which is also important for human beings. I mean, you want to have some pleasure in life, because close to addiction you can have pleasure, and so if you don't want to totally block the system which are behind addiction, because then you will be anhedonic. You will have not much pleasure in life. And I don't know of a way of really fighting addiction in a way that it will be okay. Now we have mastered addiction. You can take all you want as cocaine, but you don't have addiction. No, it's not going to be like that. It's when an addiction becomes overbearing or dangerous that we have to find something. But see, I'm not a neuroscientist in my study, but everything converges to the dopamine system always. So always, ultimately, it's dopamine system. It's dopamine system. And the answer is yes, of course, it's a dopamine system. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter which carries the function pleasure. Okay, fine. If you have addictions, because you want some pleasure. But it's dangerous too, because if you start to just be able to block the system there, and block dopamine, it will be too strong. And if you hope to block dopamine behind, say, okay, maybe in the brain, when you take morphine, it's part of the brain which activates, but if you take cocaine, it's another part, and let's say, and so maybe we block only this one, but not the other. I doubt that's going to be in the books very soon.
Yeah, so there's just not one magic wand you can wave and it'll all be cured, right?
No,
Yeah.
no, you cannot hope that now. You just can hope to decrease. With brain research, with it's a mental disorder, you can only hope to manage. You cannot hope to cure.
Right. Well, thank you so much for talking with us.
My pleasure.
It was really good having you.